Iziduko zamaZizi akwaLanga, inkomo zikaNkanyankanya, zikaZitha, zikaPhangelilanga, zeThole ladubula amanye ekhulekiwe. Inkomo zesilo sikaLombi, sikalokothwayo, esidla umuntu siyenga ngendaba. Inkomo zikaNgubonde, zikaZizi, zikaKhuze, zikaSibalukhulu, zikaDlamini. Umnombo wamaZizi, Lubelo, Busobengwe, Flathelilanga, Lufelelwenja, Sidwaba, Mhuhu, Mhlanga, Msi, Mntungwa, Ndlovu, Dlamini, Sibalukhulu, Khuze, Zizi, Ngubonde, Langa, Zitha, Ndingi. AmaZizi are a nation descended from the kingdom of AmaHlubi through King Dlamini I and are also known as AmaDlamini. King Dlamini was the son of Ndlovu Mntungwa, and he begot King Mthimkhulu I in the senior house and iNkosi uSibalukhulu in the right-hand house. Oral history has it that King Mthimkhulu went ahead and established his own chiefdom while his father was still alive. Back in those days, there were no fixed borders and land was largely vacant. Nkosi Sibalukhulu also went ahead and consolidated his own chiefdom. He begot Khuze in the senior house, Lungqi in the right-hand house, and Ngubokazi in the junior house. AmaZizi had stayed in Embo until the reign of Nkosi Khuze, who ruled in Thukela with his descendants until AmaZizi moved again under Nkosi Mkhuli, eventually settling in KwaZangashe with Nkosi Pokwana in the 1800s. Nkosi Khuze begot twins Zizi and Tolo. He also begot Miya and Thole of AmaNdlangisa. The successor of Khuze was to be one of the twins Tolo and Zizi. When they came of age and the question of appointing an heir had arisen, the matter was settled in a manner which Thole was not satisfied. So he took his followers and left his father's nation. Zizi's territory started at the Upper Klip River, going towards the sources of the Thukela River, and then along the foot of uKhahlamba Mountains to the so-called Bushman's River. Nkosi Zizi's heir was Ngubonde. Ngubonde begot Langa in the senior house, Lamyeni in the right-hand house, Ndlovu as support to Langa house, Jama as support to Lamyeni house, and Limako as the junior house. It is said that even before the year 1800, the territory of Zizi was divided into two, with Langa ruling his people on one side of the Thukela River and Lamyeni doing likewise on the other side of the river. It is said that AmaZizi were the first Bantu nation to live in the country today known as Lesotho, after the San people. These AmaZizi were split into three major groups, namely Maphetla, who arrived first, Mapulani, and Baphuti, who were the last to arrive. These three clans came from the banks of Thukela, located in the Natal province. It's possible that it was from the San people that AmaZizi heard about the land beyond the mountains, and as a result of disagreements with their relatives AmaHlubi, they thought it wise to move away. They traversed the mountains during the early 1600s, and at that period, Nkosi Madzikane was the leader of Maphetla, a name originating from the word Phetla, which is said to mean forging a new path, for it was them who pioneered a way into the new country. Maphetla had friendly relations with the Aboriginal San people. They married their daughters and employed their sons to herd cattle. They maintained contact with AmaZizi, whom they had left behind in the old country, and induced others such as Mapolane and Baphuti to follow them. Maphetla later adopted the monkey as the tribal totem and began to be known as Batsweneng or Amamfene. The second group to make their way into Lesotho was Mapolane, who got their name from Nkosi Bulani, the son of Magwili. Mapulani descended from Dlamini Zizi II, who begot Langa, and Langa bore Mafu, and Mafu bore Ndlovu, and from Mangili or Mukaudzi, son of Ndlovu, bore Bulani, and Bulani was the son of the first wife of Ndlovu. Mapulani were originally called Bahalanga. The name Mapulani came to them later. They were descended from Ndlovu and Mafu. The latter, with his three sons, Zikinyane, Gaikene, and Magwele, decided to follow Mapetla into the new country. They did not take the same route, and the migration extended over a period of about 200 years. They eventually joined their compatriots Matsetsa and gave them the name Mapetla in recognition of their having opened the road to the new country. Being of the same race and speaking the same language, the two tribes lived together in the most friendly fashion, but each preserved its own identity and organization. On their arrival in the country, Mapulani lost no time in bringing the San people under their rule and in entering into friendly relations with Bakwena and Bafokeng. In addition to their usual weapons, oval shields, spears, and battle axes, Mapulani used the bow and arrow. Without being very valiant themselves, they were better warriors than Mapetla. A few generations had passed when Mapulani, who were ruled by Sibabala, were attacked by Mpangazita and his section of AmaHlubi, and their ruler was assassinated. The descendants of Magwele, the third son of Kakeni, were favored by fortune, for though the youngest branch of the family, they came to rule the two elder branches. This was owing to the personality of Polani, who exercised such an influence over the children of his uncles that they ended up placing themselves under his rule and forming the clan of Mapulani. For a long time, Polani tried to impose his authority upon Mapetla, asserting chieftainship over them and demanding the first fruits of the pumpkin crop in recognition of it. Mapetla contested this at first, but being few in number, they ended up giving way. The dispute did not, however, affect the friendly relations between the two clans to any great extent, and they continued to live together in harmony and intermarried. While Mapulani were making their slow progress to the center of the new country, a third clan of AmaZizi followed them from Thukela. They would be known as Baphuti. Baphuti had friendly relations with the indigenous San people, and for some time they subsisted on game hunted for them by the San. Morena Mukwani formalized his relationship with San people by marrying a sister of the San ruler Qu and had a son, Morosi, by her. But it is reported that intermarriage between the two tribes had been occurring for a considerable period of time before this. Baphuti came from a mountain called Sandlulube, which in more recent times was the home of the Hlubi king Langalibalele. They seem to have left in the time of Toko Toko, a nickname given to Didi in consequence of an old quarrel. On Baphuti's arrival in Lesotho, they found Maputing and Atswane, who received them so well that they settled there, and the two tribes lived together on the most friendly terms for about half a century. So much indeed did they identify themselves with Maputing that they even adopted their emblem, the Puti or Dega, and called themselves Baphuti. These happy relations, however, came to an end, and once more Baphuti found it prudent to take the road, eventually arriving at Qilwane somewhere about the year 1720. Having, it would appear, spent 10 or 12 years on their migration from the Upper Namahadi, the distance covered being just under 100 miles. In this neighborhood, they came in contact with Bafokeng, who had recently arrived from beyond the Caledon and settled there and at Gorgor. They intermarried with these strangers, who exercised such a good influence over them that Baphuti never forgot how much they owed to Bafokeng Bantomane. A few months after the death of Polani, Tsosane and his son-in-law migrated to Kubake near Mohale's Hook. On the road, and before they crossed the Makhaleng, Maili, who was in an advanced stage of pregnancy, felt that her time had come. She managed, however, to reach the cave of a trapper called Pese. and they gave birth to a son who was called Morosi, but the San people called him Qhenga. When she recovered, she and the women who were with her followed the rest of the tribe to Kubake. This journey and the birth of the famous Morena Morosi took place in the year 1795. Morosi was taken to Mophatong, an African rite of passage, by his uncle, and after graduation remained with him till he was about 25 years old, when he returned to his father in order to be married. This took place in due course, the bride being Qwane, daughter of Tamahe, a hunter of renown who lived at Tabaputswa. Of this marriage, a daughter called Mopa was born in 1821, but she died in infancy, probably during and by reason of the distress which fell upon the land during the following year. Rebellions across the land now called South Africa had prompted the Cape Colony to pass the notorious Peace Preservation Act, which was enabling legislation for preemptive disarmament of any group where rebellion had occurred or was feared. One of King Letšie's sons was strongly opposed to this act and said if Basotho give up their weapons, they would become slaves to the Europeans. Colonial government feared that the victory of AmaZulu at the Battle of Isandlwana would inspire other Africans to pursue active resistance against British imperialism, and even worse, that Africans would unite across tribal lines to do it. The situation got tense when Doda, the son of Baphuti ruler Morosi, broke out of prison, and his father was accused of being a rebel for having planned Doda's escape. Morena Morosi was told to show his loyalty to the British by apprehending the prisoner, which he refused and instead proceeded to attack the magistracy, taking property from traders and anyone who supported the colonial government. A witness identified as Maso was recorded saying that the traders' shops were looted just before the rebellion. Morena Letšie was asked to provide soldiers to help crush the rebellion, but it became clear to the colonial officers that Basotho warriors were not reliable and many of them did not show up, among them Morena Lishuta, who was sentenced to 6 months imprisonment with hard labor. Open rebellion did not suit Letšie's goals because it would provoke the full suppression of Basotho by the Cape Colony, whereas by appearing to serve the colonial order, he could maintain his authority, albeit restricted in scope. Hence his son's troops captured the cattle of both rebels and loyals, but did not play a significant role in suppressing Morena Morosi's rebellion. Stevens, a long-term resident of the Herschel district, believed that Morena Letšie and Morena Morosi had an understanding. He observed that the timing of Baphuti attacks suggested prior coordination between Morosi and Letšie's troops. Aleph also conceded that during the rebellion, Basotho had never really engaged in any attack on Baphuti. Another colonial officer named Wood also indicated that Basotho were more on the side of Baphuti than they were the colony. In the end, Morena Morosi's mountain was successfully attacked and taken by a force of Khoi people from the Cape Mounted Riflemen, Mfengu people from the Herschel native levies, and Barclay border guard. The colonial force would have been larger if AbaThembu hadn't arrived in aid of Baphuti and Morena Morosi. The Thembu warriors were heard saying they wouldn't shoot a Mophuti man, but would definitely shoot a white male. That concludes our brief history on AmaZizi who ended up in the land today known as Lesotho. Now we'll continue where we left off with the sons of Nkosi Ngubonde, namely Langa, Lamyeni, and Jama only for now. All due respect to Ndlovu and Shweme, Olimako. Nkosi Jama's descendant was his son Dweba. When a person was accused of witchcraft and Nkosi Dweba was meant to execute them, he would protect and hide them from his people. His population grew steadily and became a big tribe. He gave generously and was loved by his people. He would be carried by his men on their shoulders, and his feet never touched the ground. He was known for constantly asking about a mountain known as Sandlulube where they resided. It is said that the chieftaincy of Langa was disbanded when their heir, Nkosi Mdingi, died before he could have any boys to succeed him. History tells us that he was killed in the Battle of Izembe, which took place in Ngqushwa in 1846. Nkosi Langa's brother from the right-hand house, Nkosi Dlamini, and his descendants managed to hold on to their chieftaincy, and a lot of their history was recorded during their encounters with other tribes as they pressed further down into Thembu land. From Nkosi Dlamini of the right-hand house, we skip to his descendant Lunika, who was the last Nkosi from the house of Dlamini to rule in northern Natal. After his reign, AmaKhuzi moved southwards under Nkosi Mkhuli. Nkosi Mkhuli begot Mavumengwana and Xabadia. Both Nkosi Mkhuli and his son Mavumengwana died in a war between AmaZizi and AmaMpondo led by King Faku around 1822. Xabadia was still a minor then, and Menziwa, the son of Zangashe, took over as Nkosi of AmaZizi from that day until he retired in 1875. Xabadia was under guardianship of his brother Nkosi Menziwa until Nkosi Menziwa went to ask AmaThembu King Gangelizwe in the late 1860s for land for Nkosi Xabadia. The latter was thereafter located in Bolombo near Mthatha. Nkosi Menziwa lived well over 100 years, ruling from Zimvubu River, and he led AmaZizi to Thembuland, arriving at Hala Great Place near Queenstown during the time of King Ndaba. Under Nkosi Menziwa, AmaZizi bravely fought in several wars, from their departure from Thukela to their alliance with the Thembu Kingdom. We've already covered the War of 1820 with AmaMpondo. It was followed by the War of 1824 with AmaBhaca in coalition with King Ngubokazi of AmaThembu. On receiving warning messages from AmaQwati, King Ngubokazi is said to have sent for all tribal rulers under his monarchy to go and expel AmaBhaca, who were then led by Nkosi Madzikane. Nkosi Ngubokazi also sent messengers to AmaGalega King Hintsa to lend a helping hand. Battles took place from Dzidza up to Lanhlangubo. Madzikane met his fate near present-day Engcobo, where he was pulled out of shrubs he hid in, and while still being cross-questioned, he was suddenly stabbed by a young Gcina man in his heart with a spear. What puzzled the onlookers even more was that while Madzikane fell down and died, the young man also tipped over and died without being touched at all. The Third War, which was also in the 1820s, was in aid of AmaThembu King Ngubokazi against AmaQwati. Preceding this war, Nkosi Menziwa had just lost his mother and was still mourning. During a nap, iNkosi suddenly woke up and told his counselors of a dream he'd had. In the dream, his mother, Mambele, told him to take part in the Qwati War, and he shall be handsomely rewarded. Indeed, this was the result. After the AmaThembu and AmaZizi forces drove AmaQwati into Gilandoda forest, Nkosi Menziwa confiscated more than 100 herds of cattle from AmaQwati that day. The Fourth War, in which Nkosi Menziwa participated, was the war of the 1840s between AmaThembu of King Mthimkhulu and AmaGalega of King Sakhile. Actual combat never took place in this war because when Sakhile witnessed the large army of Mthimkhulu, which included AmaZizi amongst other tribes, he simply retreated without putting up a fight. Roughly 30 years after this event, AmaThembu and AmaGalega were added again in what would be the Fifth War Nkosi Menziwa fought. In 1872, AmaThembu paramount Ngangelizwe was married to AmaGalega paramount Sakhile's daughter Nomkhafulo, later known as Novili, injured his wife severely. Several reports of ill treatment of Novili had been sent to Paramount Sakhili, and AmaGalega were concerned about this. On a particular day, Novili, having been injured, was dragged to Nkosi Menziwa's great place in the Bashi Valley, not far from Paramount Gangelizwe's great place. Nkosi Menziwa then secretly took the queen of Amambende and asked them to take her to her Sakhili's residence. It was that injury and its circumstances which prompted an attack on Abathembu by AmaGalega under Paramount Sakhili. It is said that AmaZizi put up a strong resistance in this war but were let down by a poor Thembu defense. The next war took place after Novili ran away from Paramount Gangelizwe, leaving behind her maidservant Nongqokozelo. In his violent temper, Gangelizwe stabbed the maid to death. When this was reported to Paramount Sakhili, he said Gangelizwe must return his child Nongqokozelo, which was not practical. According to historian J.H. Soga, Nkosi Menziwa vowed that he would never fight against Paramount Sakhili, owing to the brutal treatment that Novili was receiving from Paramount Gangelizwe. For that reason, Nkosi Menziwa was driven away by Paramount Gangelizwe and took refuge at Isiduko. He was then taken back to his land at the request of the military authorities. In a number of meetings held at the Thembu royal estate, Paramount Gangelizwe was usually witnessed ill-treating his wife. At one of these meetings, Pokwana, the heir of Nkosi Menziwa, arrived late, and to his surprise the meeting had not yet started. On his arrival, he was told that the Paramount was beating his wife inside the residence. Nkosi Pokwana refused to intervene, claiming that the Paramount, although younger than him age-wise, would make confrontation difficult. Upon being begged continually and being told that at the time he was the only one the Paramount had still listened to, he eventually went in and his intervention eased matters. However, when the war eventually broke out, Nkosi Menziwa was on Paramount Gangelizwe's side, presumably because he couldn't watch Abathembu, who had recognized his royal status and who had given him land, being attacked by an outsider. Nkosi Menziwa's forces took up position on the ridges overlooking the Yaalacha and Bua on both sides. According to the information obtained from Gebindlaba Moses Menziwa, great-grandson of Nkosi Menziwa, AmaZizi closed two drifts, namely Nomngqingo and Mawela. From the Galega forces, Ngubo was ordered to attack Menziwa, whose forces had gone around the Nzilana stream and had occupied Nzilana Ridge. Paramount Sakhili, with AmaVelelo and AmaBango, was engaged with Abathembu at Mthentu stream. It is written that the sound of AmaZizi's guns on that day suggested heavy fighting in that direction, and Paramount Sakhili dispatched one of his wings to go on Ngubo's assistance. AmaZizi were attacked from behind and surrounded by Paramount Sakhili's reinforcement. Ngubo's men drove AmaZizi into the arms of the Galega, causing them to split and flee towards Bashi. They sustained terrible injuries and were prevented from rejoining with Paramount Gangelizwe. Notably, AmaGalega also suffered huge losses. The seventh war which took place was between AmaGalega and AmaMfengu, a section of Embo who had sought refuge in Galega land. AmaMfengu had the assistance of the Europeans, who reminded Abathembu Paramount Gangelizwe of an agreement they had entered into when he came under their protection. They demanded he provides military aid in the war. Paramount Gangelizwe called on all of his subordinates, including Nkosi Menziwa, to take part. The only Nkosi from his main who did not enter the war was Dalasile Kafubu of AmaQwati, and for his disloyalty he was fined 100 cattle by Gangelizwe, which he paid without a hassle. Xhosa warriors struggled at that war, and the combined forces of Abathembu, AmaMfengu, and the colonials were more than well prepared. At this war, Paramount Gangelizwe did a very honorable thing. He sent messengers to Paramount Sakhile and asked him to take a handful of men, his counselors, and go into hiding so that Paramount Ngangelizo would avoid having to capture him, failing which Ngangelizo would have assassinated Sakhile in that war. The eighth and final war Nkosi Menziwa and AmaZizi were involved in was the Gun War of 1882. A new law had been passed to prevent all Africans from carrying firearms. This law was made to apply to both enemies and friends of the Europeans. Back in Lesotho, Morena Lerotodi and his uncle Masupa had started a rebellion against this new law. As a result, a lot of nations followed suit. The brave Morena Morosi of Baputi had taken the rebellion to another level where a war had broken out, as I had previously mentioned on the history of Baputi. Nkosi Mhlonhlo of AmaMpondomise was one of those fighting alongside Morena Morosi. Umbongo weNkosi uMenziwa KwaZangashe. Mnyamezeli, ngudungwa nkomo zakoyayo. Isigcane esihle saseMazizini. Ngumnyamezeli owanyamezela isizwe ngezwe. Umnyamezeli owanyamezela amagcaleka nabathembu. Isihlala goqweni kokwabo kwamampela. Inkomo zikaZangashe, zikaLunika, zikaNdosi, kaNdunakazi. Inkomo zikaNxiba uNoboya, zikaBhengela, zikaLubokoboko, zikaNgubonde. Ucubungulashe, uShaqa ashiyela inkwenkwe, igumbi lamagwala. Inkomo zikaLamyeni, zikaZizi, zikaKhuze, zikaSibalukhulu, zikaDlamini. In this part of the episode, I want us to go back to the group of AmaZizi and their Abembo relatives who arrived in Xhosa land, specifically KwaXalega, during the reign of King Hintsa. For some background on the name Abembo, Embo was the name of a precious metal popularly known as gold, and that name changed to Embo, being the name of the country where it was mined. Abembo used to adorn themselves in gold and even traded with the Portuguese. The section of AmaZizi who described themselves as destitute people, ukumfenguza, to King Hintsa at his Ndlovu residence had actually broken off from a group led by iNkosi Menziwa KwaZangashe. It was Njokweni, a minor house from the genealogy of AmaZizi akwaLamyeni, who attempted to take over the reins on the banks of Mzimvubu River after Nkosi Mkhulu and Mavumengwana had succumbed to Amampondo kaFaku, leaving the clan or tribe under the leadership of Menziwa as the rightful heir, because Qabadia was still very young. Njokweni was apprehended and royal regalia was repossessed from him. His loyalists followed him down Mzimvubu River all the way to the coast. Being a small, vulnerable group, they met other clans who attacked them and took their possessions such as livestock, and this is why they arrived in the Xhosa kingdom so hungry and in bad shape even physically. However, long before their arrival in Xhosa kingdom, there were already some clans of Abembo who had migrated downwards and were well received in accordance with customs, and those do not fall under the Amamfengu description. The same goes for those led by Nkosi Menziwa who came to Abathembu kingdom and paid the price of ukubusa to honor the existing king so as to get allocated land for self-rule in accordance with customs of Abantu. In 1877, during a traditional ceremony at the home of Nqayichibi, a Xalega ruler named Mkhuli had arrived with 12 men to come and enjoy the festivities. Mkhuli and company later demanded more alcohol and bulldozed their way into where the traditional beer was stored. It was on that action that they were thrashed by Abembo and one of them killed. That sparked the war, which took place in a series of battles at Guadana, Bika, etc. These skirmishes, initially unbeknownst to Paramount Sakhile, and given the promise that Sakhile had made to the Cape government, rendered organizing Amagalega armies rather impossible, because on hearing about it, Sakhile was more interested in making peace. Veldman Bikija deployed an AmaZizi regiment led by Makhanjana, the descendant of Nkosi Zanokhanyo Bikija and other Abambo clans who also deployed in full force. This Abembo army was assisted by the Cape government, presumably because the Cape government was in disagreement with such an unjustifiable war on Abembo. Paramount Sakhile temporarily retreated or fled to KwaBomvana and only returned when a peace treaty was to be signed. Thus, Makhanjana had taken possession of the territory in Tshantshongo, initially reporting directly to Abembo region in Ndlovu, not reporting to Sakhile. But when relations warmed up between Sakhile and Makhanjana, with intermarriages taking place, the peace was fully restored and the house of Makhanjana Bigija started to report to Sakhile.